Okay, great. Let's get a few people invited. I'm doing an hour-long show. Happy to take questions. I've got an idea of some stuff I want to demo. So I'll just start with an intro of what Jekyll is and show some Jekyll sites I've been working on, and then we can see if you're interested in watching how to set up a site or deploy to GitHub pages, or to do something like change a blog feed or change a theme. So firstly, Jekyll is a popular static site generator. It is originated from someone who works at GitHub, and Jekyll was built in Ruby. You don't have to know any Ruby code to work with it. If you want to do some more custom stuff, you can write a plugin in your repo or in a separate repo, which is in Ruby, but mostly you just have to worry about HTML, Markdown, and if you want to add some CSS and JavaScript. And then what's important for Jekyll is to make it more dynamic. So you don't have to duplicate so much of your code as if you use templating. So Jekyll uses liquid templating, and that means you can write template files, and those get reused across different pages. And if you can have something like a menu or an icon or a feed, something that you want to reuse in multiple pages, you can do that using an includes, which is like a function. The Jekyll website here, they've got comprehensive stuff in their docs and their resources. Getting started. I also have, just to go from the basics of installing Jekyll, I've got a collection of gists that I reference for this. So you need to install Ruby and then install Jekyll, and this works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I'll post, see if I can post this link in the chat. Some relevant gists here are installing Jekyll and installing Ruby and Bundler. So I'll just go through these, and then I'll get more to the actually using Jekyll site soon. So we've got instructions for Linux and Mac. Just installing Ruby and Bundler. Bundler is the package manager for Ruby, and we're going to use Bundler to install Jekyll and plugins and themes. And Jekyll will be one of the gems which is in your gem file, your list of packages. So a good flow is to install Jekyll for each Jekyll project, so you can have a different Jekyll version for each. I've got some more specific details here on this install Jekyll one. Once you've got Ruby installed, you want to add Jekyll to a project, you have to add a gem file and run some bundle commands. Bundle you want to install globally, so you can install gems in any particular project. There's also an option to install Jekyll globally, so you can reuse it across projects, but I don't think this is a good idea, because then you're using one Jekyll version across projects which might have different needs. So getting into the coding part, I'm going to start off with making, let's see, I've got a couple of I'll reference what I added in the description as a just getting an existing Jekyll site going. So this Jekyll blog demo is a site I made based on the Jekyll docs tutorial. So if you go through the docs, there's a getting step-by-step tutorial, which is 10 steps going through the fundamentals of Jekyll, including liquid templating, layouts, which is your template files, storing data, blogging, eventually deploying. And if you follow this tutorial, then you'll arrive at a site which is similar to this one that I've got set up. I've added some stuff to it to showcase. Sorry about that. I've also added plenty of documentation here and preview, so stuff that you wouldn't just get by following the instructions. So this makes it easy for beginners to use. If you're not comfortable with building a Jekyll site from scratch, I'd recommend using something like this, like which I'm going to do now, where you take an existing site and you make a new site from it, and then in your own GitHub repos, and then you can set it up locally. So I'm just going to make a project which I'll throw away later, but just use this for now. Okay, so I've added another copy of that repo to my repos. It's different from a fork. It doesn't have the history. It is just one commit, which has, you see in the one commit in the history, it's got all the files in it. This is nice if you don't want to contribute back to an original project that you find. You just want to copy it as it is to your project, if your project list, if it has a use this template button. So going through what you would do, you would then copy the SSH or HTTP command, the URL to your GitHub commands. So I'm going to, git commands. We're going to clone that repo. And now I've already got Ruby installed. If you're using brew, you can do brew install. Ruby 2.7 is covered in the gist, and on Linux you can use apt and Windows as the downloader. So I've already got Ruby. I'd recommend Ruby 2.7. There's a newer one which is 3, which is out, but it doesn't support Jekyll so well yet. I've also got Bundler installed. Bundler or bundle. You can use either command. And you can see that Ruby is installed globally, Bundler is installed globally. Having a look at what's in that gem file, what we're going to install with Bundler. We've got Jekyll 3.9, which is for GitHub pages. Cram down parser, which is also needed for 3.9. You have to set this explicitly. We are using the Minima theme, and sitemap as a plugin. So that lets us generate a robots file and a sitemap.xml file for crawlers to look at. I'm going to run bundle config. Just check my make commands. I've got I usually use makefile, which works well on Linux and Mac, where you can run a make command. So while that's going, I'll show you what it looks like if you used make directly. You just run make install, and it would run the lines here, installing, the setting up the config, and then doing the install. And then similarly, to do a serve, instead of typing the whole command, I like just being able to say make serve or make s. So when you install Jekyll, it needs a whole lot of gems, plus the Minima theme will have a couple of gems which it uses, and those are all installed here. Everything went fine. If I do make install, it should see that everything's already up to date. Yeah, it didn't try and install anything more. And then to serve, you can do that serve command. I'm also going to use the trace flag, because this makes errors more verbose, and live reload, which means that the browser will refresh when you change your files. Okay, so here's the site that we're serving locally on localhost, and if I make a change to this, like let's add another post. So here we got 2 posts showing on the home page. I'm going to open that folder in VS Code. And let's add another post. You have to use the date for the first part of the name. And you need to give the post a title. Optionally a description. Layout we're also going to set as post. There's a way you can set the layout in the config as well, so you don't have to set it per post, but then just add it on the post itself. And then the body of the post. I've saved that, and then if I check in the background, it's already rebuilt the site with that post and refreshed the page. So now there's that post here. And posts are sorted automatically from newest first to oldest last. Okay, now I'm going to get this site set up on GitHub pages. Now there's nothing to push, it's already there, so I'm just going to go to the repo settings, and in the settings you can set up GitHub pages. So this means that we're going to be serving the site from the master branch, and the root directory. If you had a site in the docs directory, you would just pick that, but I didn't ever use that option. And save. Okay, it took a few seconds, and now the site is up and running. Here it is on GitHub pages with this domain based on my username, and then the repo name is used for the subpath. If you don't want to have the subpath, then you have to create a special repo. So here's mine, which is using a name that matches this format, and then this one is deployed on the root like that. So if you have a blog or portfolio site, this is useful, but you only have one like this, but you can have as many as you want that are on a subpath. And let's check out the site that we set up here. See, it's got everything set up properly. There's the robots file pointing to the sitemap. If we go to that sitemap, it shows us the listing of the pages on the site. Let's check one of them. And if you want to customize the site, you can do that locally and make a commit and push, and the site will rebuild, or you can edit directly on GitHub. And then let's say we want to change something in the config file. Okay, let's change the title of the site by changing this title value. We should see the description as a value at the bottom, so let's change that as well. You also want to change this value so things work properly locally and on the remote setup. And if you have a look at that latest commit in the history, you have to see it's got a status, which is currently orange because it is building, and when it's done, like now, it's got a green tick. And if we refresh the site, we'll see our new title appearing there and the description at the bottom. And if there's too many files in this repo and that's off-putting, then you can have a look at one of my simpler repos. Okay, this is a much more basic site. It doesn't have any folders. It just got a index file for index.html and a config file and a gem file. The gem file is not even needed on GitHub pages. It's for local use. But if you want to be developing locally, you want to have that. This site also uses a theme, a different theme. The site before was using one. This one uses, let's see in the config, I'm using Jekyll theme architect. The other one used Minima. That's set in the theme of the config and also in the gem file. I'll post a link to the site. And here, looking on GitHub at the theme that we're installing, when we build the site and GitHub pages, or just running locally, you get the benefit of these assets and layouts, and you don't have to worry about setting those up, but you can override them if you want. So, for example, there's a default layout. We don't have a defaults folder, sorry, a default file in the layouts folder, but if you did want to override it, then you could create a layouts folder with the name default.html, and then that would be used for the site, or you can add some other layouts which don't exist in the original one, like a home layout or a page layout. You want to avoid forking or downloading the theme and working with it directly. Some people do that, but it ends up creating a repo which has too many files which you don't need, and it's hard to change the theme because if you want to switch to another theme, you need to delete all of HTML files and then add the ones from another theme, compared to with the simple one, where the repo is light. You change the config, you change the gem file. GitHub even has a neat way of changing between themes. If we go to GitHub pages settings, you can use change theme, and they give you a preview here. When you edit this, it'll change. I haven't used it in a while, but it'll change your config or the gem file, or maybe just the config. So there's about 10 here which you can choose from. They all have different approaches for a nav bar. Sometimes there's just, you're going to have to add one yourself. So when you switch between themes, you might find like when one had a layout for a post.html, the other one didn't, and you have to create your own thing based on another theme. So it's good to have a look at themes on GitHub and see how they handle things, and then add that to your own logic, if you your own repo if you need that. But for a one-page site, you don't need a nav bar. You simply just switch between themes. So let's skip this. Any questions, areas you want to see working on some? You want to see some more Jekyll sites that are simpler or more complex, or add anything specific to a site? Just post in the chat. Okay, thanks Daniel for the question. Sorry, there's a lag of a couple seconds between the recording, so I'll have to fix that up on the next one, so it's a bit more real time. Yeah, so the obvious choice for tracking traffic would be Google Analytics. There are alternatives which I haven't used, but Google Analytics is free and easy to set up, and there's a couple of ways to do that on a Jekyll site. So Google Analytics means that you can, for those who don't know, you place a JavaScript snippet or a couple of lines on your site, and then that must be on every page on the site, and when that loads, then the user's browser will send information to Google to collect the stats that are about what you're doing on that page, how long the session is, how long you've been on each page. The setup is anonymous, so Google, so you can't tell who someone is based on the traffic in your Google Analytics view, but you can also set here we go. So here's a generic way to add analytics to a site, not using Jekyll. You have a JavaScript snippet like this, which Google Analytics gives you, and then you just change the ID value for each site. You'll get this when you create the account in Google Analytics. And this ID, it doesn't make sense to keep that secret, because this is going to be displayed on a page and loaded for a user. So if someone wants to, they can inspect your HTML and see this being used. And if you end up getting spam traffic, then you just have to make sure that you block certain locations or IPs or traffic that's not apparently coming to your host name. But anyway, got a Jekyll guide here, and the lightest way to do this is to use a plugin. So there's a Jekyll Analytics plugin, and this handles that snippet for you. It also handles some other platforms which I haven't heard of before. I think this Matomo one is a self-hosted one. If you want more control over your data, then you have Google having all your data, but then there's more work to set it up. And as per the instructions here, you would add it to your config file in your plugins, and you would add it to your gem file as Jekyll Analytics, and then you would install that with your other plugins, and then you just have you run your site in production mode. You don't want this analytics tracking happening on your dev site or locally, because you'll get noise in your tracking. So what you can do is run it like that, and you have to configure your config file as well to have that ID. I prefer to avoid installing extra dependencies for something relatively simple like this short snippet. It's going to be mostly constant. Mostly constant because this was the old version some years ago. Google's changed to using the shorter one, but it's mostly the same and easy to set up. So a way I like to do it is using a theme that already has it, and they've just got this as a snippet, like the one I was using for the first site, the Jekyll demo. Already has that set up, because the minima theme, which is under it, is lying within that, contains this snippet. So here's the minima theme, which is used by that. I'll see if I can find another example. So if you're an alternative to using the theme setup, like if you're building a site from scratch or making your own theme, is you just add this as a file in your includes section. So you would, let's go to the test Jekyll site. So we'll take this snippet and add it is a file called analytics.html, and that references this variable from the config. So I'm just going to use a dummy value now, so I'll save this. The site's going to build. It's not going to use this thing yet. If I go to layouts, default, I'm not going to mess with the head bit now. Normally you'd want to put it inside a head tag, but this is already being used for something which is not in this repo yet. So I'll just put it below. So I'll reference that saying if the environment is production, which includes GitHub pages, then also check if the Google Analytics variable is set up in the config, which we'll do next, and then include that snippet. And this layout is used on every page. You can also nest the layouts, so a layout of posts can have something specific to displaying, like the date and the title of a post, but within that layout it can reference this as a base layout, so you can do some powerful templating stuff there. So we're going to save this now and go to the config and put in a dummy value for Google Analytics. And rebuild the site. The site's actually rebuilding, and every time I do a commit, you can be more efficient on not using GitHub's resources so much by doing this on a pull request on a few files, and then merging a pull request or making the changes locally, and then when you're happy, only then pushing. So if we go to the commit history, we'll see it's done a build for each of those commits, creating the file, updating the layout, and updating the config. And if we go and view the site, we should see that it is appearing on the page. There we go, there's the snippet with a made up ID. Okay, I'm going to showcase now a fun site that doesn't use so much of Jekyll because it's just a one-page site, but it's more about using some JavaScript and CSS and setting this up within a Jekyll site. So this was a fun one that is a one-page site. It's got 2 drop lists, and you pick a fruit or vegetable, 2 pairs of them, and blend them together and see what color it makes. Let's do green and orange, and then you can add a random bug from SVG. And to see how this is set up, we've got an assets folder, like you would have not on a Jekyll site, you still do the same stuff. Styles, the CSS. So here's the bit that controls the appearance of that bug and splats. And here's the part, magic, that makes the colors overlap. So there's that green and the orange and the light green over where they overlap using the mix blend mode. So I didn't use a theme for this site, so you can have a look to see in the index HTML. I use a sprinkling of Jekyll because it helps make sure the links aren't broken, and you can build your site using config values rather than writing everything in HTML. So here we've got the title of the site is pulled in from the config. We are referencing that CSS file. There's actually a better way to do this because this link could point to a path that is not there. You can use link, which is a liquid tag in Jekyll, which references a file in your code base, and if that file was not there, then it will give you an error at build time. You just can't use the relative URL, but so you have to just use site.base URL. This is that subpath that we have. It puts that in there, because if you have a look at the source of the page, we reference our CSS on Food Blender site, then assets. Here's that CSS. If we just referenced it without the subpath, then we'll get an error, or in this case, it's pointing to another site that I have set up. So you need to have that subpath, like the JavaScript one is definitely going to be broken. So you need that subpath here. And here's the JavaScript file that gets loaded. So here I've got the configuration of colors to use, and these get added dynamically into the drop list. If you want to have a look at the kind of sites you can build with Jekyll, I've got a website to list all my public GitHub repos, and I've got a section on all the repos that I've tagged as Jekyll. So here we've got my own blog, which uses a Jekyll theme. I had to add the navbar myself and did some customization to add some includes and layouts bits that I couldn't get enough of from the theme. The site where you view gists, you can get a copy of this site and it'll pick up your own username if you deploy it, and you can see all your gists available. If you're interested in photo galleries, didn't have time to get into this one so much, but this one I built on an existing site by Cloud Cannon. They made this template which hasn't been maintained, but I added some cool stuff to it, some documentation to make it easier to use, and I actually deployed it using Netlify rather than GitHub Pages, which means you don't have to use a subpath, and you get more advanced things that you can do, like you can build build a branch on a PR, build that as a separate site that you can preview before you merge, and it offers some things like rendering a single page application as a static site, compressing your assets for you. If you're just starting out, I'd recommend sticking with the GitHub Pages. If you want to be using some custom plugins and a build flow, like if you want to use Python as part of your building process, then I recommend that. Like for my site with all the repos, this uses a Ruby script, which is not allowed on GitHub Pages, but because of running on Netlify, I'm able to run my own script, which gets repos from GitHub in an efficient way and then builds them as in the site. Yeah, this is a simple gallery one, fun to play with. It's also the nice thing about Jekyll is it's dynamic. So if you want to add a new image or blog post or whatever content, you don't have to go and edit all your HTML pages to have an extra bit in the top. You use a dynamic way of picking up the pages or picking up the images in a directory, and then Jekyll will figure that out and build it for you. And it'll be serving as a super fast site because a Jekyll site is statically rendered HTML from your markdown and your templates. So there's no Ruby server, no Python server, whatever, or Node server needed. It's just a folder of HTML files and assets which get served using something like Nginx within GitHub Pages or Netlify. You don't have to care about configuring that; it's all handled for you. Okay, I'm going to start winding up. Thanks for attending, and guest appearance by Brian dropping in. Happy to take requests for topics for the next one, and I think I'll be able to deal with the experience easier, just figuring out how the software and the sound all works. Also, if you want to have any one-to-one chats or demos, if you've got questions on Jekyll sites or web development in general, I'm happy to set up a chat one-on-one, or if you think it would be useful for someone else, you could to listen on it. All right, that's it for me.